Okay. And we're live, so I'm glad we were talking about our topic before we went live. So people get all the great nuggets of knowledge without being able to see us. So hi everyone. Welcome to Legal Lunch and Learn, a weekly live show where we ask an expert your questions on a legal topic. My name is Cindy, and I'm staff attorney here at Maryland Legal Aid. Our co-host of the show is Mariel, also a staff attorney here at Legal Aid. Hi, Mariel.
Hey, Cindy.
And of course, working in the background is our production engineer, Alec Chase. So as I do this every time we do a legal show, please call us if you have an immediate legal issue. Our our email is lawyer@mdlab.org. That's LAWYER@mdlab.org. Our phone number here is 443-451-2805. And just because we are super friendly people and you take some friendly advice from us, it does not establish an attorney-client relationship between you or any of the attorneys you see here today or with Maryland Legal Aid. So again, if you do have an immediate legal issue, you want to talk to an attorney one-on-one, please give us a call or email us. And for those who do need captions, this video will be uploaded to YouTube, and we will let you know in the comment section down below when that happens. And of course, if you do have any questions about expungements, make sure you're putting your questions in the comment section down below or sending us direct messages if you want to remain anonymous. So with that out of the way, let's go into the topic of our show today, which is expungements, things that go wrong. And many things do go wrong. I think a lot of people think expungements, oh, it's straightforward. And a lot of times it is, but because it's such a strangely long legal process, long in terms of human life, not long in terms of litigation. I think some litigation drag on for years, but if you're waiting for something to come off your record, a couple of months can seem like a lifetime, especially if you're waiting for a job. So let's start, Mario, by talking about some laws that don't make sense, and this will be really brief because we did touch on it last week. So I want to start with the marijuana issue. So the part of the law, does it make sense, or it's kind of not covered in the law? I think last time we talked about PBJs. So if you have a PBJ, you have to wait for at least 3 years, maybe more, depends on when your probation is over, to file for expungement. And in those wait times, you cannot have another conviction. So the weird part of the law comes in when you have a marijuana charge, which if convicted, you can get expunged in 4 years, even if you have another conviction in the middle. But if you have a marijuana PBJ where you're not actually convicted of the offense, but you have another conviction while you're waiting for your PBJ to be eligible, then some courts seem to think that means the marijuana charge doesn't come off. And other courts seem to, I feel like they should take this approach, because I'm very pro expungement, in case people haven't figured that out. Because I feel it doesn't make sense that a conviction, which is something more serious, gets to come off, where a PBJ, where it's not even a conviction, doesn't get to come off. Sorry, Mary, I'm looking at you, I'm like, comments, but I think we're on the same page here.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to add to that. It's absolutely ridiculous. If you do file a petition for expungement for possession of marijuana, probation before judgment, and there's an objection, like we say, if there's an objection, there should be a hearing. Not always, but there should be a hearing, which we'll get to in a little bit. And I would encourage anyone to reach out to us or to go to the hearing themselves and point this out to the judge, that this doesn't make sense. It's clearly, can't say for sure, but it's probably a mistake in the law, because why would you make something harder to come off your record when you weren't convicted of it versus being convicted? So it's always worth the argument, at least.
Yeah, and I think it's probably just an oversight that people didn't really think about when when they added the section about, marijuana convictions able to come off. And I think the heart was in the right place, but this is when, maybe hire someone with attention to detail on their resume and get that taken care of. Another law that doesn't really make any sense in terms of conviction is the burglary charges. Amiro, do you want to take that one?
Yes, and I actually have a wonderful update on this one. So typically, only certain convictions are eligible for expungement after a certain period of time, and burglary 1, 2, and 3 were eligible for expungement after 15 years of waiting after the end of the sentence date. They forgot to add in burglary 4. So 1, 2, and 3 are more severe than 4, but they forgot to say burglary 4 was eligible for expungement. So some courts weren't letting that go through. Didn't make any sense. Why can the more severe charge come off and the least severe come off not? Doesn't make any sense at all. But that actually was just changed. So it was in one of the bills that ended up being vetoed by the governor just by inaction. And they just did a veto override this week, or maybe late last week. And so they added that in. So that should go into effect in the next 30 days or so. And fourth degree burglary has been added in. So if you have a conviction for fourth degree burglary, it's been more than 15 years since the end of your sentence date, and you don't have any subsequent convictions in that 15-year time period, it should be eligible for expungement now. But for years, you could have burglary 1 come off and not burglary 4 technically under the law, which didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, it did not make any sense. And no, I think this is one where even if we took it to court and argued like this is clearly not the intent of the lawmakers, that's, if you went to law school, that's something you argue. But unfortunately the judges' hands were tied because the law is written and needs to be applied to everyone the same way. So I'm glad this one was fixed. So for those with a fourth degree burglary, either you came to us and we weren't able to file it for you, or you filed it yourself and you got it denied. It's time to refile that one because it is eligible for expungement, assuming it's you have waited the correct time period with no further conviction. And if it's but of course if it's not a conviction, you would probably have been eligible for expungement anyway. So we're talking about convictions in fourth degree burglary that can maybe come off now. So I don't call today to schedule your appointment with us to get that taken care of. So another comment, and I don't know if you have examples of this, Mariel, but I'll briefly go over this. Is because our criminal code changes. So I don't just mean the language in the code, I also mean the numbers associated with the code. So for those who are, interested in looking at the expungement law, it's very clear when they name so this offense and this offense is eligible for expungement, they put in the number for the offense. And when they put in the numbers based on the current criminal code, and because the number system for the criminal code has changed over the past, actually it probably has been a while since it was last changed, but within the last 2 decades it has changed. So when we look at older cases filed in in the 80s, in the 90s, sometimes if you look at the charge, if you look at the name of the charge, and if you read what happened in the case, it's very clear that it corresponds to something that the legislature now intends to be eligible for expungement. But if you look at the number of the code itself, you won't find it in the expungement law itself. So that's one of the issues that we do also come across, is when the prosecutor go, wait, no, this is not eligible for expungement. This is not the correct code. And I don't know if you experienced that, Mario.
All the time.
All the time.
All the time. Yeah, I would say if you have charges that are from the mid to early 90s or before, there's a really good chance that this might happen. And so it's important to look at what the language of the charge was, and then also the codes. There's also sometimes something called a CJIS code, which you can do some legal research on. So I would say if you have these older charges and you're not quite sure, or the codes aren't matching up, again, reach out to us because we are able to do that research on it and pull the older laws. I've had to go back to laws from the 70s to deal with this. it also, there's trouble with assault 1 versus assault 2 because that isn't always been called that, things like that. So this does happen, but it's always worth looking into. But it
Yeah.
can get confusing.
Yeah. And of course, this is not a catch-all for all the things that go wrong legally when we talk about the section or the laws that don't make sense. These are just some of the really common ones we see. So if you come across something weirder, still let us know. Give us a call and we can see if we can walk you through it. So moving on to the other very common issue we have, I want to talk about the waiver issue. So this is when, and I'll set the frame real quick. So you had to sign a waiver release, releasing, the city police department, the courts of liability if you want to expunge a case that's less than 3 years old. And the reason is after 3 years, you can't sue them civilly for liability. So after 3 years, you don't need a waiver. Before 3 years, you need to waive it, waive your right to sue, really just because if you're basically asking someone to get rid of the statements or any evidence that's surrounding the case. So you won't be able to build up a case to sue them, and they won't be able to have the evidence to defend themselves, which is why you had to fill out a waiver. So we have, oh my gosh. We go to expungement hearings all the time, and so many times I want to say maybe slightly less than half of the time it's waiver issue. I mean, I haven't looked at the numbers, but it
I would
feels
be
like,
surprised.
yeah, I feel like we're going to court for waiver issues all the time. And so Mary, do you want to talk about like the common issues surrounding the waivers?
Yeah, of course. There's a lot of them. And I would say even if we're not experiencing them, when I've been in court, I see a lot of pro se people representing themselves have waiver issues. And one of the big things is people don't realize they need it. So we know as lawyers, and we do this all the time, but if you're filing on your own and you didn't realize you needed to sign this waiver and release, you might have forgotten it. It also needs to be signed by a witness, so it may not be filled out correctly, things like that. Um, there's a couple big things on it. So when you fill it out, you need to put the law enforcement agency's name and also the complainant's name, which many times is the police officer. Those are not always easy to find. So if you're using Maryland Judiciary Case Search, it's not always up there. If you lost your police report, whatever it might be, you might not know that information. But if those aren't correct, the court, likely there will be an objection and it needs to get fixed. Sometimes you can go to court and they'll give you the information. Some courts refuse to give you the information unless you request it in writing. Some will give it to you over the phone. Every court's different. So you always want to call, always the advice. If you don't know, call the clerk, see if you get the information. But sometimes the court will lose your waiver. That's a big problem. So, in some counties, they're on e-filing where you just scan it and send it over. You're not really losing them there because there's a pretty clear copy, pretty clear record that you submitted it. But in our paper file jurisdictions, which are going to be Baltimore City, Prince George's County, and Montgomery County, you're mailing this to them or dropping it off. It might get lost somewhere, unfortunately, or get put in the wrong file. And sometimes you'll go to a hearing and get that fixed. Sometimes you won't. So that's a big problem. But also, going back to having the correct law enforcement name, you can't just put, Prince George's County Law Enforcement. That's not specific enough. You need the actual agency. So the sheriff's office, or it's Maryland State Police or something like that. You can always call, you can get those records, but it takes a little more digging if you don't know off the top of your head. And that can be a reason that they won't allow the expungement to go through because you haven't filled out the waiver properly, so they can't accept it.
Yeah, and I just want to also emphasize that different jurisdictions treat this differently. Sometimes I had to call literally a couple of different police agencies to figure out which police agency it was that did the rest or served you with the citation, and then from a batch number figure out what the name of the officer is. And sometimes they're very helpful. Sometimes they'll just look up on their computer and tell you because all these are still public record. And sometimes they give you the run around, so it really is different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I do understand if you want to do expungements on your own, you think you should just wait out the 3 years to avoid this issue, but I would say no, it's at the end of the day, it's still a really straightforward thing. It's just a piece of paper that you need to sign, have someone witness, and get that sent in. And before COVID, I would say when we have expungement hearings and it's a waiver issue, if you show up to court, sometimes they'll just let you do it there, and someone from the courtroom will witness it for you, or like do it on open record.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot.
yeah.
Actually, I've been to hearings when there were, tons and tons of expungement hearings set in. And before they even started all of them, the judge announced, if you have a waiver issue, like, please come up here, and handed out blank waiver forms for people. So they were very aware that this is a problem specifically for people filing on their own, and that it's not intentional. People weren't trying to do this incorrectly or trying to not waive this. It's just they didn't know. So, some courts are really helpful on it, but since we can't really go into the courthouses right now, it's not as easy. So it's one of the things you want to do the legwork before you file it. Make sure you fill it out properly or contact us to help. But as long as you do it properly and make copies to make in case it gets lost, usually you should be fine.
Usually, yeah. So I want to also talk in terms of, pro se filing. We don't see this as often when we file things, because we generally know how different courts handle their filing practices. Some courts want all your traffic citation to be listed on the same petition, even though you're only asking for one thing from the entire citation case to be expunged. And some don't want that. They just want the one citation number that you want expunged. So different courts have different filing practices. If you want to do this on your own, I can't tell you because each court is different. So even, between district court and circuit court, they want different things. And sometimes the difference is also very minute, although sometimes important. So for a while, a couple of years ago, when we had someone who had a name change, we generally, or at least I was doing this, have them sign the new name, because that's legally who you are once you do your name change. However, some courts, I won't name names, I say some, but I mean one court, was having an issue because they match signature from the petition to the signature on the plea document in the case. So if you are signing a different name because you had a name change, the signatures don't match, and they either will hold a hearing or deny your petition outright, saying that no, someone else is filing these petitions. So depending on the jurisdiction, sometimes you want to sign the legal name, which I think is a correct way of going about it, and sometimes they want you to sign the same name that you used when the case happened. So this is one where I'm strongly suggesting, if you had a name change, come talk to us first, because these are things that probably only we can help you and figure out for you.
So I have to say, I've actually never had a problem with the name
Really?
changes. And I'll tell you the way I do it. And I'm not saying that this always works. I'm just saying it's worked for me. Is you have the case caption and you leave that the way it was, the way the court records it, even if your name's different now. And then when you sign at the bottom, sign your legal name now, but say your last name changed, you got married or something, put your first name, former last name in parentheses, and then your new last name. So they know that it's you and you're acknowledging it, but that you have a name change. So just make sure they're both written there so they can see it. And I've had that go through.
Well,
if that makes sense.
I should have talked to you earlier, because that would have saved me some, like, wait, do I file this under the legal name or the name that's on the document?
I may have just gotten lucky too, because one of the things too is that different clerks are handling these, different states attorneys are looking at it to object, different judges are reviewing it. So just because something goes through once doesn't mean it will again, even if it's the same court, which can be very frustrating, but it makes sense. It's just human nature. People are interpreting these things slightly differently. So I always say put every name you've ever had that you want to sign on there. list it all out so they can see what's going on.
Yeah.
Because part of the reason I think they object in those cases is that it is confusing and they want to make sure it's the right person. So if
Right.
you can try to acknowledge on the form that it is you and try to indicate what happened with the name, you might have better luck. You might not. So call us.
Yep. And speaking of objections, I think each court handles objections a little differently too. Um, also moving to our next topic too, every court's handling it a little bit differently once the pandemic hit as well. So before the pandemic, some courts will just, if there's objection from the state, some courts will just deny your petition outright, and sometimes they don't even mail you the decision. So that has happened. And some courts will insist on holding a hearing, which I think procedurally that's what they're supposed to do. If there's an objection, you're supposed to have a hearing.
So
but
sorry.
Yeah,
If
no,
you
go ahead.
file and there's an objection and no hearing is set in, you can request a hearing, and it gets denied, request a hearing or reach out to us and say that under the statute, it says if there's an objection, the court shall enter a hearing in, because you're allowed to defend yourself at that point if someone objects. That doesn't always happen, and sometimes you don't get the notice or people don't do that. But if you request one, it should just be set in. And if it's not for some reason, you can request one and they should allow that. Can't promise it, but they should.
Yeah, especially with the pandemic now, I think sometimes they might have gotten your request and it might be months before they can even give you a hearing. So let's talk real quick. And this is the last thing that we'll talk about in terms of things that can go wrong. Let's talk real quick about different things that's happening with courts. So what I've seen is I think one of the really more urgent one is that some courts are now reopening to do expungement hearings. So when usually they only hold a hearing when they think something has went wrong and they want both sides to come, the other side being the state's attorneys, to come and explain to the judge which way it should go. So that's when you have an expungement hearing. So now that courts are reopening, some counties are assuming there's a 3 to 4 week delay on mail. So they're setting hearings, at least a month, if not 2 months ahead of time. And that has been working out well for me. And some courts are not doing that, and which has resulted in a lot of times either we don't get the notices or we get a notice, a week after the hearing is actually set. So if that has happened to you, still contact us because we can help you through that process and get your case back in court. Mario, do you want to talk about the other things that might be different from during the pandemic?
So pandemic or no pandemic, always call the court for where you're filing, and you always want to file in the highest court where the charges were. So if you were charged and you had your hearing or your trial in district court in Baltimore City, that's where you want to file, that kind of thing. But always call over, because they're all doing things differently. They're all setting hearings in differently, and hearings now, I guess they always could have been, but now it's much more commonplace. You could have phone hearings, you could have Zoom hearings, or you could have in-person hearings. And I'm sure there's a rhyme and reason to it, but I can't figure out what it is when it comes to which courts are doing which things. So you always want to call and find out. If you have an in-person hearing, you can request a remote hearing. You can request it over the phone, and you can request to have it over the phone. You need to put it in writing to request it typically, but it just depends on the court. But the mail is a big problem because it is so slow right now, like Cindy was saying. So we're not getting hearing notices, or you're getting them 2 days before your hearing. And is that enough time to take off work, or do you really want to come in? Whatever it might be. So it's been a little problematic. One of the other things is filing. So some courts, well, with all courts, you can still file it, but that doesn't mean anyone's going to look at it. So the clerks might deal with it, and it might, so in expungements in general, you file the paperwork, and then the court notifies the state's attorney's office and the police department and a victim if it's a conviction where there's a victim involved, and they all have 30 days to object. So all the courts, I think, now are doing that, but some of the courts are now stopping. So once no objections received, or even if objection is received, it just stops. So, there's one circuit court that is doing that, and other ones are just processing them. So it kind of depends which court you're in, what's going on. It's really important to remember too, is that if you have an active criminal case, you can't have any cases expunged. So what I've seen in a couple instances is that you waited months and months, but they haven't set your hearing in, or the judge just hasn't ruled on it because of the pandemic and that certain court isn't doing anything. And then you pick up a new charge. And then that's a concern too, because it should have been off your record before, but it hasn't. But now you have a new charge, you're not eligible anymore. So if you have that issue, definitely contact us as well. But the waiting, there's a pandemic, it's special circumstances. There's not really any control over that, but it can cause issues if you get a new charge. And typically it's going to be a traffic charge, which I'm saying, which unfortunately holds everything up. So those are really important to kind of take into account. But in general, call the court. I say that for everything. It doesn't need to be about expungements because every court's doing things differently. And even from week to week, there's different phases for the courts, but from week to week, it might be different also, or whoever's running it or whatever it might be. So call the court if you're working on yourself, but always call us when it comes to expungements as well.
Yeah, we are probably one of the most knowledgeable organizations in Maryland for expungements, if not the most knowledgeable.
We just do them all the time.
We do them all the time.
So many expungements. And the thing is that a lot of people aren't doing them in bulk, or, expungements, private attorneys can do them, but they don't do them all the time, or they'll do it for one or two clients. The public defender's office does them sometimes, and they're wonderful, but they have a lot of other stuff going on, obviously. And, so do we, but we devote a lot of time to it. And like we're saying, different courts do different things. And there's this little nuance here, this little nuance there. And a lot of times you might not know that unless you're doing this all the time. And if I've had hundreds and hundreds of expungement clients, so I've seen a lot of it, and Cindy has too, and there's a bunch of us in this unit that work on them a lot. So we've kind of not seen everything. Believe me, we see new hiccups all the time.
Yeah.
But we usually know how to navigate it, or at least, I can quote that law to you backwards and forwards from memory, and I think we all can, which most people can't say that because they're, and that's okay. But if you have questions, I would say reach out to us, because we really, really probably are. I'm sure there's people just as knowledgeable, but we have a lot of knowledge on expungements here.
Yeah, that's true. We're definitely on the forefront of it. I think we devote a lot of resources to it. We purposefully devote a lot of resources to it, because this is really, in terms of Community Lawyer Initiative, which is, a unit within Maryland Legal Aid. This is really our bread and butter. So it's a staple we do. So with that said, for people who do want to do a file for expungement and need our help, make sure you're contacting us, and our information is in the comment section down below. And so next week, hold on. So in terms of questions from the audience, if your question is this eligible for expungement? Just give us a call. Our information is in the comment section down below. Contact us anytime and we'll get back to you. So sorry, we will not be answering if this particular case or your particular case is eligible. Just give us a call.
And keep in mind that's for confidentiality reasons too. You want to call us and have it be a private thing, so confidentiality and privilege aren't lost. And so, you don't want us talking about your personal case on here. We're not doing it to be lazy. It's for everyone's best interest.
No, but we also don't judge you on the kind of cases you have. Even if you feel like, I don't know if it's eligible for expungement, because you feel it's very embarrassing, still let us know. We don't, believe you me, we've seen a lot of different cases. It's not going to shock us.
Yeah, no, please. We're never going to judge you based on the charges you have or what's on your record. We're here to help with it. And we've done this
absolutely.
a lot. And
absolutely.
And we would never not help someone because of what's on the record, unless it's not eligible for expungement under the law. Nothing to do with it.
Yeah, we're about moving forward and having a better life. So with that said, we don't have any question from the audience that we can't answer right now. But with that said, next week is going to be our final segment on expungement. Yay for those who are waiting for another topic. But for those who love expungements, oh no, it's coming to an end. So next week we're going to talk about the CLI experience, so the Community Lawyer Initiative experience when it comes to expungements. So we will walk you through what to expect when you contact CLI for expungements, and what kind of documents you might need, and the turnaround time, and basically the process of expungements when you come to us for expungements. So tune in if you're curious. Tune in if you're not curious, because we're fun people, and you should watch our videos. But if you do find this video helpful, make sure you're sharing with anybody you know, and like our Facebook page so you can get notifications when we do go on live. So with that said, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.